Atta girl.
Welcome to Aging on the Suncoast. I'm your host, Jason Martino. Nationally, the month of May reflects appreciation for older Americans. The Administration for Community Living's theme for this year's Older Americans Month is Blaze a Trail. In short, this theme is to highlight awareness of important issues facing older adults, and finally to acknowledge ways Americans are advocating for themselves, peers, and communities. For today's show, we think it is appropriate to acknowledge the aforementioned theme with a focus on aging within the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, a population known simply by the acronym LGBT. Individuals who are LGBT have experienced and continue to experience a multitude of issues similar to and very different than heterosexuals. On today's show, we have invited Joseph F.X. Smith, a consultant with Advocacy for Rainbow Elders. Joe will help us explore what these issues are and understand ways we can promote better inclusivity on the individual and organizational level. Joe, welcome to Aging on the Suncoast.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's not your first time either.
Not my first time.
Yeah, I think back in 2014 is when we talked about this topic last, and that's one big reason why we're bringing it up again, because it's been a while since we covered it. So.
Great.
Yeah. So as an area agency on aging and an aging disability resource center, we're constantly striving to serve a multitude of diverse populations out there. And with the LGBT initiative that we've taken in the past and we continue to do so, we're always learning new things about this community and how best to serve that population. So we're glad that you're on the show today because you're going to bring a special amount of great attention to that too. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Joe.
Well, about me, I
Sure.
got involved in the LGBT movement back in Philadelphia several years ago when I retired, and I came down to Florida. Didn't see a whole lot going for elders, LGBT elders, and went to our local community center and started up some programming there, and then got tied into the Area Agency on Aging, and I'm now the chair of the LGBT Elder Initiative of Pasco and Pinellas counties. What I'd like to say, though, is why we're doing this and why it's so important to speak to this audience is that this audience are my peers, I assume.
Sure.
Most of them are my peers, and I think a lot of my peers don't really understand what's going on. We are called the silent generation. And people say, well, why would you be called the silent generation? And I'll give you an example. It's the best way to do it. I have a friend who's 72 years of age who moved into subsidized housing in Tampa, and he was forced to hide his identity in order to have a social life. In order to play cards, bingo, or whatever was going on in their social community, he could not reveal that he was necessarily gay. The language around that is coming out of the closet and being closeted. Coming out, people have heard that, means you're comfortable being who you are with the people you're speaking to at that moment about your identity, totally as you choose. Going back in the closet means when you are afraid and are not comfortable, you can be who you are. So the silent generation, my generation of older LGBT people, most of their lives had spent a lot of time coming out, accepting themselves and fighting for the gay causes, and now are being forced in a lot of senior settings to go back into the closet. And that's why they are the silent generation, and that's why I'm thrilled to be here talking about some of the issues.
And that notion just sounds horrible because of the experience that I've had with different individuals that have come out of the closet. I can't imagine it was a moment of freedom for them. So when they have to go back in, or when they've chosen to go back into the closet, it's a regression. And so hopefully today's show will open up people's eyes to talk about different things that will help people remain a little bit more sensitive to some of the things that are going out there. In my world, in the aging world, and we've been doing this for a long, long time, we get caught up in talking in a world of jargon. So a lot of times what I have to do is I have to break down my jargon for a general audience so they can understand different things. And what I tried to do when I was reading the monologue was I tried to break down what LGBT means in there too, but what other key words are out there that might be helpful to define a little bit better so our audience can understand where we're going to go from here.
We are acronymed to death these days.
Yes,
absolutely.
We are. Yeah.
LGBT stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. Transgender is a category that many people may not be very familiar with. Our gender is whatever we feel inside. So I am a male and I feel like a male. I assume you're a male, you feel like a male. Women who are female feel like a female. That is your gender identity. Your sexual orientation is what you are attracted to most naturally in terms of romance, in terms of intimacy, in terms of physical appearance. That's your sexual orientation. Your gender identity, so you are a heterosexual male that's your gender identity, and your sexual orientation is that you are heterosexual. The difference is that transgender people can have a variety of sexual orientations. Internally, they may feel they're the opposite gender, but they still may have attraction to either a bisexual, a gay, or a straight person. That depends.
I think you've made a great distinction because in my experience with talking to people about different things, some folks have seen it as not mutually exclusive, and I think that there is a pretty big distinction between orientation and the identity piece of that.
And gender, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
I think as background, we should just clarify some terms that people may not be aware of.
Do, by all means.
Something is called heterosexism. I mean, it sounds like a big word. It's the assumption of society, the institutionalized assumption that heterosexuality is the norm and everybody is supposed to be heterosexual.
Yeah.
That's a given. An example of that would be that an older couple, straight couple, can go out to dinner and hold hands across the table, but if a gay couple were to be holding hands across the table, people would be looking and they would feel uncomfortable even doing it. It's because we assume the norm that everyone is heterosexual, and therefore heterosexism blinds people to seeing that we are not all that type.
Right.
Another term is homophobia, which is very different than heterosexism. Heterosexism is the assumption made by a culture, and we have to break through and see that. Homophobia is a fear or a discomfort with anything related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, and expresses itself in a variety of ways. Most notably, you're perceived as a sexual being rather than as a person. I mean, it's very interesting because, you know, if you come out to somebody who's homophobic, they'll say, oh, well, they're gay or they're this. Well, you know, they also happen to be a contributing member of society who may have been a CEO of an organization or whatever, but they're only perceived in that way. And it's based on fear on some level.
Yeah, I think that's the root word of phobia is going to do that. And back to the heterosexism, in anthropology we would call that heterocentric, having a belief that all of the culture, and culture changes from one area to another, that that is the centrism behind that. We've talked a little bit about terminology that helps set the stage a little bit about some of the key terms that the audience might hear during our show today. But what I also think might be a little bit helpful is to talk about some relevant statistics out there. I'm pretty dumb when it comes to statistics, and a lot of times when I hear them in there, I have to think about it a little bit too. So in your opinion, what's a good viable statistic that you think that would have a benefit to be talked about today?
Okay, we'll try to come up with a couple. Research done as of 2014 said there are 3 million LGBT older adults.
3 million.
It is projected by 2020, in 4 more years, that number will increase from 3 million to 7 million. The key here is 3 million that's self-identified as LGBT, and the reason they're expecting so many more people to surface as LGBT is that the younger you are and the baby boomer, the more open you are about your sexual orientation. So I think that's an important one, is that our numbers are increasing because people are feeling more comfortable coming out with aging. A couple of other quickies that might be of some interest are that 49% of lesbian and gays over the age of 50 live alone, compared to 33% of heterosexuals who live alone. So LGBT persons are more likely to be living alone. They are less likely to have family to take care of them. They are less likely, half as likely to have children, although some of them do have children. We can't stereotype. They come from a variety of backgrounds, and some people don't come out until they're much older in their lives and have a beautiful family, but many people don't. I think something else that's important to understand is that a statistic is that 40% of LGBT persons say that they have never told their doctor about their sexual orientation. And the doctor-patient-provider relationship is so critical to how you administer care. They're afraid. Why are they afraid to come out to their doctor? I think that's a part of why I'm using that statistic, is there's some fear back there. And
we might cover that a little bit later when we're going to broach how organizations can take a look of how they can extrapolate that information a little bit better by showing more inclusivity or some sensitivity to some different things. Let's go back to the living alone one, because you and I had a conversation before for today, and one of the things that we highlighted was the importance of, as an area agency on aging, we always target different populations to promote better access to aging types of services in the home and community-based services. And when you and I were talking about, we were talking about living alone, and when you mentioned that statistic, I was very fearful of that, because one of the targeted populations that we tend to try to serve are folks that are living alone, no matter what their background or diversity. It's a hard population for us to reach. And we know that they're out there, and we know that the constructs to help them stay at home and age successfully are severely limited if they don't know who an area agency on aging is. So if the population is much larger in the LGBT community compared to at least the data for a heterosexual like that, then the area agency on aging has got a lot of work to do to make sure that we're able to reach that population. We know for a fact that if folks that are living alone don't have different types of services in there, that their chances of being institutionally prematurely are going to be a lot higher than if they had different constructs in there. So I enjoyed all our conversations with you prior to the show. I've met you a couple times. You spoke at our advisory council for the Area Agency on Aging and highlighted a lot of key concepts for them too. And one of the things that I was pretty enamored with was that you took a personal approach to explaining to our organization and the advisory council about LGBT throughout the 20th century, and I was hoping that you could take a little time and just speak to that today.
Sure. I'd like to come back to one other statistic which ties into what you're saying.
Yeah.
LGBT elders are 5 times less likely to use or make themselves available to services for seniors and for elders. Why are they less likely to use those services compared to heterosexual elders? Because they're afraid. Because they're afraid, and they come out of a background of always looking for signs of acceptance or afraid they're not going to be accepted, so they don't use them. Historically, and I love doing this, especially if your audience is my age. I was born in 1946. What year were you born in?
71.
1971. Well, we're going to go through the 20th century from 46 to 73. How's that?
I appreciate that.
In 1946, when I was born, homosexuality was considered a sex crime equivalent to rape or equivalent to child molestation. In 1952, and I invite your audience who were alive in the 40s and 50s to be aware of this. In 1952, the first assessed diagnosis label was given to homosexuality as a sociopathic personality disorder. In other words, in 1952, you were a serial killer. You were a serial killer. 1953, Dwight Eisenhower issued an executive order to eliminate every gay and lesbian throughout federal service. 10 to 20,000 people were rounded up. Some of them were ended up in hospitals with electrical shock treatment to try to change them. If you remember the 50s, not you, but your audience, that was the days of McCarthy. There were witch hunts for communists. There were witch hunts for gays and lesbians. And what emerged out of that was a kind of gender rigidity. The ideal was the husband was the breadwinner and the wife stayed at home, and there were 2 children, and we lived in suburbia, and this kind of polarization happened within our culture. In terms of being gay or straight, the 60s brought on civil rights movements. 1969 brought on the Stonewall Rising in New York City. That was the beginning of the fomenting of the movement toward equality. 1973, the American Psychological Association finally removed homosexuality from their categories of a mental disorder.
Psychology has come a long way, hasn't it?
Yeah, but the key here is that my peers, the cohort that we're addressing, grew up most of their formative years with this background of perceiving that they were mentally disordered. So out of that comes this kind of anxiety about using services that are available. They become more isolated, and they're much, I say we're always scanning. I'm always scanning for some kind of sign. Am I going to be accepted here? How open can I be here? How closed do I have to be here?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, and I think that when we're coming up with a different understanding of how individuals and or organizations can better promote themselves to be a little bit more inclusive, we're going to talk about that a little bit later on.
I think moving in the 20th century, I mean, there were a lot more advances in gay rights throughout the 20th century. In the 80s and 90s, there was DOMA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the position we're at now, okay, is that you still have a senior population that are afraid to avail themselves of services and are looking. So what are the kinds of things that they look for? What's the situation? Well, when they're going to go look for an assisted living facility, they're going to see, well, would I be accepted here? And they'll want to know, what would the signs be that would help them to see that? And some of the signs, like for an organization, would be something as simple as marketing materials that have pictures of a same-sex couple, you know, or, oh, in a policy statement, they have an anti-discrimination clause that includes sexual orientation and gender identity. The population of gay and lesbian that we reach out to, they need to understand that there are resources that do welcome them and they are friendly to them. And our role, I think, is to try to help educate people about how they can do that better.
Yeah, you and I spoke about hiring practices as well, being another strategic way to make sure somebody feels comfortable when they're coming to their facility or to their place of business or whatnot.
Hiring practices for sure. If you have a significant portion of gay and lesbians on your staff, that makes other people feel comfortable. By the way, gay-friendly doesn't mean they have to be gay. We just need to know you're not going to be judgmental. I don't care what your sexual orientation or gender identity is, as long as you're not going to be judgmental. So it's not an issue of you have to be gay, I want a gay doctor. I have a gay doctor because I'm more comfortable with a gay doctor because my other straight doctor abused me, gave me a prostate exam and said, isn't this great? And I thought, oh my, that is not very professional.
Yeah.
So when you feel you're not accepted and can't talk to your own doctor, you gotta find a resource.
That's the time you would want to be as open as possible, right, especially if you have some health conditions. So we talked a little bit about the 20th century and what you experienced and what you saw was other people experiencing at that time. We're now in the 21st century. We're clean 16 years into it, 2016. Are the barriers still there? Have they broken down a little bit, or are they still around?
The barriers are there in organizations that are not aware. Okay, there are barriers there. For example, there's a nursing rehab unit where a woman who has Alzheimer's, semi-dementia, a lesbian, was a resident there, and she could not speak. And I don't know all the detail, but she couldn't speak very well. And she became more and more problematic, argumentative as it came to getting her dressed, as she couldn't dress herself. And a friend of hers who popped in and was talking to the administrator, and the administrator said, she's becoming more and more cranky and we're having a difficult time dealing with her. Do you know why? And the woman said to her, well, it's the first time I've ever seen her in a dress. She never wore dresses her whole life.
Let's follow up on that a little bit later on. Joe, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. Please stay with us while we take a short break. As usual, don't forget to have a pen or pencil ready. During the break and at the end of our show, we'll be running contact information for our guests and various national and local resources. When we come back, we'll explore those resources.
James is 70 and a writer whose joint pain has been a story in itself. His doctor prescribed a new medication that may not be affordable, even with James's Medicare Part D plan. James called Shine. Shine volunteer counselors can guide you to money-saving prescription assistance programs, including a program that helps pay Medicare Part D plan costs for limited-income seniors. Shine costs nothing but could save you time and money. More information is available at 1-800-963-5337.
Welcome back to Aging on the Suncoast. During the first half of the show, Joseph F.X. Smith helped us illustrate what being LGBT looks like, as well as the complexities of aging within this community. Let's continue this important discussion and take a look at some resources that may be helpful to individuals or organizations. Joe, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah. Before we went to break, you were telling a story, and I very rudely cut you off. But I want to hear the end of the story because I think it has a great amount of importance.
The story essentially was that this woman who was in this facility was being dressed as she was unable to dress herself, she was being dressed by others, and they kept putting her into female dresses because she was a female looking like a female. But indeed, she was a lesbian, and they did not know that. She had no local family contacts. A friend came from the long distance and was talking to the administrator and said, "I've never seen her in a dress before."
Really?
It is a situation of where we are today, depending on the awareness level of the organization or the training of their employees or whatever. That is the kind of barriers that people experience and face, and why they're less likely to avail themselves of resources that are there. Yeah. When it comes to resources, I mean, nationally, if you have access to a computer, if you can get online, and as you know, many elders do not have that.
Good point.
But if you have access, there is a multitude of resources online. The National Resource Center on LGBT Aging is a primary resource. I believe that's going to be listed on the graphics with the contact information. That is an organization that's been around for many years. All the research, all the articles, all kinds of YouTube videos, all kinds of things about educating yourself about your own needs, advocating for yourself as an LGBT elder are there. There are other national resources as well. I'd say just Google LGBT Elder Community Centers resources, and you'll find a bundle of them. But for example, LGBTSR, which comes out of Colorado, also is a reflection of a whole movement out there and has wonderful things. There are LGBT elder initiatives around the country. One in the Delaware Valley of Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia area, has a well-developed website in which they have blogs and webinars in which they will address health issues of lesbians in their 70s, for example, or they may address what do you look for when you're going to look into a long-term care facility if you're LGBT. What would you really need to do to make sure your friend, partner, or whatever was going to be taken care of appropriately? So that kind of thing. So on the national level, there are many. There are lots, thank God, they're surfacing, but most of our population, I don't know about most. How computer savvy we all are varies.
I think it's growing. I think.
Oh, it is growing.
Yeah, we've always advertised a couple different modalities to get that information, but I think what we're seeing, the population that we're generally coming into contact with is becoming more and more proficient with the computers. They're the wave of the future, I hate to say. But
I think the younger baby boomers have more access to the computers than the older, the older people among us. Mm-hmm. But therefore they have information resources, and I'm saying the educational blogs and the questions you can ask are a good support network, especially if you're isolated in a rural area or somewhere and don't have much access to community centers or whatever. Locally, should we move into some local resources?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I wanted to add that is if I was LGBT and I was looking for resources, I may start on the national level, but I think I would probably start with the local level too. So what is available locally, at least in Pinellas and Pasco County, where somebody could get good information about how to resolve whatever issue that they may be dealing with.
There is a national as well as an international movement of LGBT community centers in cities around the country and around the world. And those LGBT community centers are to serve every aged population of the LGBT community. And therefore, they have a lot of different kinds of programming going on. Here locally, we have Metro Wellness and Community Center. Oh. Interestingly, it is not called LGBT Community Center, as a lot of these are not, because of the fear of discrimination.
Yeah, stigma.
Metro Wellness and Community Center. Metro was founded 23 or 24 years ago around the HIV crisis. They have 9,000 clients that they work with on the wellness side, and elders, LGBT elders, are welcome to go for medical care, for pharmacy, for whatever, to the wellness side. The community center side has a variety of different types of services and programs specifically directed toward elders. There's a men's group that meets weekly, gathers between 20 and 40 men on a weekly basis around educational topics, discussion topics, or a guest speaker, or sometimes they go out for lunch or to a museum, the Gulf Beaches Museum or something like that, as a social activity. The main thing is isolation. Social isolation is a big, big issue among all older people, as you know, but even more so, I think, for LGBT. So the men's group fulfills a real kind of need. our women, our lesbian women, have different events. They do event kind of things. A really funny story, which may reinforce stereotypes, was the men's group last October, a year ago, were hollowing out pumpkins because two guys who were retired florists were helping us make pumpkins with flowers. So all the men are making the flower arranging, and the women went off to go-karting. Just fits the stereotype. There is truth in something. There's always a little truth in stereotypes. You just can't apply it to any individual. Also, transgender persons. Metro Wellness and Community Center has the biggest outreach program for the transgender community. All kinds of support groups, all kinds of psychological, all kinds of fun things, how to deal with your name changes, how to address people. I mean, so there's a big movement there. In terms of now, Metro is present in 3 places. It is present here in St. Pete, it is in Pinellas County, it is present as well in Pasco County, although the presence in Pasco is a much smaller presence. And it's also present in Ybor City in the Tampa area. In Pasco County, which is a little different geographical arena than this area, the programming is much smaller and not specifically directed toward elders, but there are activities for families. They find that there's a lot more LGBT families with children up in that area than we're aware of. They're probably here, they just don't surface. But as LGBT, they surface up there. So that's the primary local one. There are other ASAP, AIDS Services Association of Pinellas County, which is now a member of Empath Healthcare. They have programs as well for LGBT seniors, especially if they're HIV related. The Sunshine Senior Center in downtown St. Pete has a support group for LGBT elders.
One of my favorite places to go.
Guided by a professional psychologist so that they can deal with their own personal kinds of issues around their identity. So there's some local things happening, and we're hoping to make more happen.
Going back to Metro, and I'm very familiar with Metro. The area agency lists them on our database as a great resource for folks on there. And you and I were talking about, you had corrected me because I used an old term that was sensitivity training, and we now call it cultural competency. Does Metro offer cultural competency? That might be a good thing for organizations that are wanting to reinvent themselves to understand.
Yes, yes. Cultural competency is basically a training program in which you make your employees aware of the issues and how to deal with them. Yes, Metro is a SAGE affiliate. SAGE is Services and Advocacy for Gay Elders out of New York, founded in 1978. It is the leader in cultural competency training in a national kind of way, and they seek to get local community organizations like Metro to become SAGE affiliates and then do cultural competency training. Yes, cultural competency training is a great way. ACA hospitals just did training for all employees here locally, so that's a good thing that's happening.
That's a great tool they can put in their toolbox, and we appreciate it. Joe, I appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate the education that you brought today and also the advocacy that you bring continuously. We're just so happy that you came on the show. We hope you enjoyed this month's broadcast. We also hope this episode was educational and sparked your interest to pursue any resources we spoke to. At the end of the show, we'll highlight those resources again, so get your pencil ready. We'll see you next month, and until then, please maximize all the opportunities life avails you.